The funniest part about that $95,000 invoice was that they expected me to pay it. The sharp cry of seagulls echoed across the harbor as I stood on dock C holding an envelope stamped with bold red letters that read Final Notice. Salt hung in the air. Diesel fumes drifted from a passing sport fishing boat. The marina lights reflected across the dark water like scattered gold coins. And according to the people who had mailed me that invoice, I now owed $95,000 for the privilege of using my own $6 million marina. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so unbelievably arrogant that for a second I thought it had to be a mistake. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 42 years old, born and raised on this stretch of coastline, and every piling, gangway, and dock box sitting in front of me existed because my family built it. My father started Walker Marina in 1989 with 2 slips, a rusted workboat, and a loan the bank almost refused to approve. He spent 30 years expanding it one section at a time. Summer heat, hurricane seasons, recessions, fuel shortages. None of it stopped him. By the time he passed away, the marina had grown into one of the most valuable private waterfront properties in the county. Every morning when I walk those docks, I still hear the creak of rope against wood and remember following him around with a wrench that was way too big for my hands. That place wasn't just property. It was family history floating on salt water, which is exactly why what happened next felt personal. I unfolded the invoice and read every line twice. Community Marina Access Assessment. $95,000 due within 30 days. Failure to comply may result in suspension of marina privileges and enforcement action by the Harbor Oaks Homeowners Association. Harbor Oaks, the same HOA whose members kept their yachts tied up in slips my family owned. The same HOA that had never contributed a dollar toward maintaining the docks. The same HOA that suddenly believed it controlled the entire waterfront. The wind rattled a loose halyard somewhere across the harbor. Metal tapped rhythmically against an aluminum mast. I stared at the paper and noticed something strange. The invoice wasn't asking for rent. It wasn't asking for maintenance fees. It was charging me as if I were a guest, as if I needed permission to be there. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about money. It was about control. And nobody understood that better than Victoria Langford. If you've ever met the kind of person who mistakes confidence for authority, you know exactly who she was. 53 years old. Perfect hair. Designer sunglasses. Always stepping off a luxury yacht like she owned the coastline itself. Victoria had spent years building influence inside Harbor Oaks. Committee meetings, elections, rules, assessments. She loved every inch of power that came with that title. HOA president. But lately she wanted something bigger. The marina. The waterfront was the crown jewel of the community, and Victoria hated the fact that it belonged to someone she couldn't control. A week before that invoice arrived, I'd watched her standing near the fuel dock hosting what looked more like a yacht club reception than an HOA gathering. Wine glasses, catered food, music floating across the water. She smiled for photos while guests walked around acting as if they owned the place. Back then I assumed it was harmless. Looking back, I realized they were already testing boundaries, already pretending ownership, already laying the groundwork for something much larger. The harbor lights shimmered across the water as I folded the invoice and slipped it back into the envelope. Around me, dozens of expensive yachts rocked gently against their lines. $1 million vessels. Floating symbols of status and wealth. I looked at them for a long moment and smiled again. Because what Victoria Langford didn't know was that my father had left behind more than a marina. And before this was over, those yachts were going to become a very expensive mistake. The next morning started the same way most mornings had started for me since I was a kid. The harbor woke up before the sun. I could hear gulls circling overhead before I even stepped outside. The air carried that familiar mix of salt water, bait fish, and diesel fuel drifting in from the commercial docks a mile down the channel. Some people need coffee to feel awake. I just needed to walk the marina. The wooden planks beneath my boots still sounded the same as they had 20 years ago. Every creak felt familiar. Every piling carried memories. My father used to say you could tell the health of a marina by listening to it before sunrise. If the ropes were creaking, the pumps were humming, and the water was moving, everything was working exactly as it should. I believed that because he believed it. Walker Marina was never supposed to become some luxury destination. It started as a working harbor. Back in 1989, my father bought a neglected stretch of waterfront that most investors ignored. The shoreline was rough. Half the docks were falling apart. Several slips were unusable. But he saw something nobody else saw. He saw potential. For years, he worked 7 days a week rebuilding sections himself. He replaced boards by hand, installed new pilings, expanded the slips one permit at a time. Some nights he came home so exhausted he could barely finish dinner. But he never complained. He loved that marina more than anything he owned. By the time I graduated high school, the property had become one of the most respected private marinas on the coast. Charter captains rented slips there. Commercial operators trusted our fuel dock. Families kept boats there for generations. Even during hurricane seasons, people knew Walker Marina would still be standing afterward. My father built that reputation one handshake at a time. When he passed away 3 years earlier, ownership transferred to me. I remember standing inside his office after the funeral. The room smelled faintly of old paper, engine oil, and cedar wood. Nothing had been touched. His reading glasses still sat on the desk. A yellow legal pad remained open beside a stack of permits. Sunlight came through the window overlooking the harbor, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice explaining some maintenance project that needed attention. That day I promised myself I would protect everything he spent his life building. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. The marina carried our family name. Losing it was never an option, which made Victoria Langford's growing interest impossible to ignore. Harbor Oaks had expanded aggressively during the past 5 years. New waterfront homes appeared where empty lots once sat. Luxury boats became larger every season. Property values climbed. Wealthy newcomers arrived expecting exclusive amenities. Somewhere along the way, Victoria started presenting herself less like an HOA president and more like the unofficial ruler of the shoreline. I first noticed it during community meetings. She spoke about public access as if she personally controlled the harbor. She referred to neighboring properties as community assets. Every proposal seemed to involve expanding HOA influence beyond its actual boundaries. Most people never questioned it. They saw expensive homes, manicured landscaping, and rising property values. They assumed she knew what she was doing. But every time I heard her speak about the waterfront, something felt off. The harbor did not belong to Harbor Oaks. It never had. Yet Victoria kept talking about it as though ownership was simply a formality waiting to catch up with her plans. As I walked past the fuel dock that morning, I noticed something else. Several large yachts belonging to Harbor Oaks residents occupied slips that had previously sat empty. New vessels had appeared almost every week. Some were worth millions. Their polished hulls reflected the morning sunlight like mirrors. The strange part was not that they were there. The strange part was how comfortable everyone seemed acting as if they already owned the place. And standing there watching those yachts gently rock against their mooring lines, I started realizing the $95,000 invoice was only the beginning of something much bigger. Victoria Langford understood something most people never did about power. Real power was not ownership. Real power was convincing everyone else that ownership no longer mattered. I saw it happen firsthand over the next few weeks. The harbor remained beautiful as ever. Morning sunlight danced across the water. Charter captains fueled up before dawn. Pelicans perched on weathered pilings waiting for breakfast. From a distance, everything looked normal. But underneath that calm surface, Victoria was quietly transforming the marina into something entirely different. It started with signs. New polished metal signs appeared near the entrance roads leading toward the waterfront. Harbor Oaks Marina District. Then came community newsletters describing upcoming improvements to shared harbor amenities. Shared. That word caught my attention immediately. There was nothing shared about the property. The marina belonged to Walker Marina Holdings, the company my father created decades earlier. Yet somehow the language kept changing. Every newsletter pushed the same message. Every community update referred to the waterfront as though it already belonged to the Homeowners Association. The strange thing was how many people accepted it without question. One afternoon, I stopped by a local coffee shop overlooking the harbor. The rich smell of roasted coffee beans mixed with the scent of seawater drifting through the open patio doors. 2 Harbor Oaks residents sat nearby discussing slip assignments for boats they planned to purchase later that year. One of them casually referred to the marina as the neighborhood facility. Not my marina. Not private property. The neighborhood facility. I remember staring out the window at the water and realizing Victoria's campaign was working. People were beginning to believe the story she wanted them to believe. A few days later, I attended a Harbor Oaks board meeting out of curiosity. Victoria stood at the front of the room wearing a crisp white blazer and the confident smile of someone completely comfortable being the center of attention. A large presentation screen displayed aerial photographs of the waterfront behind her. She moved through her slides with polished professionalism. Future harbor improvements, community boating initiatives, waterfront enhancement programs. Every image included my marina. Every proposal assumed control over assets the homeowners association did not own. Yet nobody challenged her. Board members nodded along. Residents applauded. Questions focused on scheduling and amenities rather than ownership. It was like watching someone redraw property lines using confidence instead of legal documents. After the meeting ended, I lingered near the back of the room. Victoria eventually spotted me standing beside the exit. Her smile never changed as she walked over. The scent of expensive perfume lingered briefly in the air. "Ethan," she said, "I hope you enjoyed the presentation." I told her it was impressive, because honestly it was. She had spent years building influence. People trusted her. That kind of trust could be more valuable than money. She glanced toward the waterfront photographs displayed on the screen. "Beautiful harbor," she said. "It really belongs to the community spirit of Harbor Oaks." The statement sounded harmless, friendly even, but something about the way she said it stayed with me. She was not talking about legal ownership. She was talking about perception, and perception was exactly what she was trying to capture. As I drove back toward the marina that evening, the orange glow of sunset reflected across dozens of yacht hulls tied to slips along the docks. More boats had arrived. More Harbor Oaks residents were moving in. More people were treating the marina like an extension of their neighborhood. The ropes creaked softly against polished cleats. Water lapped against the seawall. Harbor lights flickered to life one by one. Standing there, I finally understood Victoria's real plan. She was not trying to buy the marina. She was trying to absorb it. If enough people believed the waterfront belonged to Harbor Oaks, eventually they would stop asking whether it actually did. And judging by what I was seeing, she believed she was already winning. The real takeover began so gradually that most people never noticed it happening. One Monday morning, I arrived at the marina just after sunrise and spotted a new banner hanging near the main dock entrance. The fabric fluttered in the coastal breeze above the water. Harbor Oaks Yacht Club. I stopped walking and stared at it for several seconds. The smell of salt water mixed with fresh paint drifting from a maintenance project nearby. A diesel engine rumbled somewhere across the harbor. Everything sounded normal except for the fact that Harbor Oaks did not have a yacht club. At least not one with any legal connection to my marina. Yet there it was, hanging over property they did not own. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. By the end of that week, things escalated. Residents began receiving invitations to waterfront social events organized by the Homeowners Association. Catered dinners appeared on the docks. Live music echoed across the slips on Friday evenings. Golf carts carrying HOA volunteers moved up and down the property handing out brochures describing exciting new marina programs. Every flyer featured photographs of my docks, my fuel station, and my harbor facilities. Not once did they mention Walker Marina. Not once did they acknowledge private ownership. It was as if my family's name had been quietly erased from the waterfront. The strange part was that nobody seemed concerned. Most residents assumed everything had been approved. Why would they not? The events looked professional. The brochures looked official. Victoria made sure every detail projected authority. One afternoon, I walked past a temporary booth set up near the harbor office. A smiling volunteer was collecting registration forms from residents interested in premium boating memberships. Premium memberships for what exactly, I wondered. The answer came faster than expected. A week later, one of my dock managers handed me a copy of an HOA newsletter. The paper felt crisp in my hands. Fresh printer ink lingered on the pages. Across the center was a chart listing annual boating assessments, slip access fees, harbor improvement contributions, and waterfront membership packages. They were charging people thousands of dollars. Not for HOA amenities. For access to facilities sitting on my property. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt something else. Curiosity. Because every new document they distributed created a paper trail. Every fee collected created a record. Every event generated evidence. Meanwhile, Victoria looked more confident than ever. I watched her one evening standing on the upper deck of a massive white yacht belonging to one of the Harbor Oaks board members. Harbor lights reflected off polished fiberglass. Laughter drifted across the water. Wine glasses sparkled beneath decorative string lights. She moved through the crowd like a celebrity greeting supporters. Residents thanked her for improving the waterfront experience. They praised her vision. They talked about future expansions and additional marina services. Nobody seemed to realize they were discussing property rights as if they were social plans. A few days later, another surprise appeared. New security personnel started patrolling portions of the marina. They wore uniforms displaying Harbor Oaks insignia. One even politely asked a commercial fisherman whether he belonged in a section of dock that had existed decades before Harbor Oaks was ever built. The fisherman laughed when he told me about it later. I did not, because by then I understood exactly what was happening. Victoria was not merely organizing events. She was building an alternative reality, one where Harbor Oaks controlled the waterfront because everyone acted as if it did, one where enough confidence and repetition could outweigh legal ownership. Standing at the end of Dock C that evening, listening to ropes creak softly against their cleats, I watched another yacht glide into a slip beneath the Harbor Oaks banner. The sun disappeared behind the horizon. Harbor lights flickered across the dark water. And for the first time, I made a deliberate decision. I was not going to stop them. Not yet. Most people think fighting back means acting immediately. They imagine angry phone calls, emergency meetings, lawyers firing off letters, and dramatic confrontations. My father taught me something different. When someone starts making mistakes, do not interrupt them. Let them finish. So that is exactly what I did. I let Harbor Oaks keep going. The days rolled by, and the marina became busier than I had ever seen it. New yachts arrived almost weekly. The deep hum of powerful engines echoed across the harbor every afternoon as vessel after vessel eased into slips beneath banners they had no right to display. Salt spray drifted through the air. Dock lines tightened. Harbor staff carried luggage carts loaded with supplies for weekend boating trips. To anyone visiting for the first time, it looked like Harbor Oaks owned the entire waterfront. Victoria certainly acted like she did. Every few days another announcement appeared. New membership programs. Expanded boating privileges. Reserved dock access. Waterfront appreciation events. The language became bolder with each publication. Temporary signs became permanent signs. Informal gatherings became official functions. Residents paid fees without hesitation because they genuinely believed they were supporting community operations. I started collecting everything. Every newsletter. Every invoice. Every brochure. Every email. I kept them organized inside a filing cabinet in my office overlooking the marina. The cabinet slowly filled with paperwork. Sometimes late at night, I would sit alone listening to waves slap gently against the seawall outside while reviewing another stack of documents. The office smelled like old wood, coffee, and sea air. Harbor lights flickered through the windows. Every document told the same story. Harbor Oaks was charging money for assets it did not own. The amounts kept growing. Thousands became tens of thousands. Tens of thousands became hundreds of thousands. Then something even more interesting happened. Residents began submitting maintenance requests to the Homeowners Association regarding marina operations. Broken dock lights, slip assignments, fuel access concerns, parking questions. Instead of directing them to me or my staff, Harbor Oaks handled the requests themselves. At least they tried to. Victoria created committees, assigned volunteers, published operational updates. She was not just pretending to manage the marina anymore. She was actively doing it, or at least creating the appearance that she was. The deeper she went, the more records she generated. The more records she generated, the more valuable they became. One afternoon, my dock manager walked into my office carrying a packet of papers he had received from a resident by mistake. The resident assumed Harbor Oaks and Walker Marina were the same organization. Inside the packet were membership agreements, assessment schedules, fee receipts, and operating guidelines. I thanked him and quietly added them to the growing collection. By then, the filing cabinet required a second drawer. Yet despite everything I was seeing, I never challenged Victoria publicly. I never removed the banners. I never demanded meetings. I never sent threatening letters. In fact, I remained unusually cooperative whenever residents approached me with questions. Some probably assumed I had reached an agreement with Harbor Oaks. Others assumed I no longer cared. Neither assumption was true. The truth was much simpler. Every day Harbor Oaks continued operating its little waterfront empire. The situation became harder for them to explain later. One evening I stood alone at the end of dock, watching sunset paint the harbor orange and gold. The water moved gently beneath the slips. Yacht masts swayed against the fading sky. Music drifted from a gathering aboard one of the larger vessels. Victoria stood near the upper deck greeting guests while photographers snapped pictures. She looked completely confident, completely comfortable, completely certain the waterfront belonged to her now. I watched for a few moments before turning toward my office, because hidden inside that filing cabinet sat a growing collection of evidence, and with every passing week Harbor Oaks was helping me build it. 3 months after the first Harbor Oaks banners appeared, I finally opened the one thing I had been avoiding. My father's records. The cabinet sat in a storage room behind my office overlooking the harbor. It was an old steel filing cabinet painted gray decades earlier. The handle felt cold beneath my hand. Dust coated the top. The faint smell of paper, salt air, and machine oil lingered in the room. For years I had only opened it when absolutely necessary. My father kept everything. Permits, surveys, contracts, correspondence, notes written in his careful block lettering. Every major decision connected to the marina ended up somewhere inside those drawers. That afternoon rain clouds rolled across the bay. Wind rattled the office windows. The harbor looked darker than usual. Whitecaps formed beyond the breakwater. I pulled open the first drawer and started sorting through folders. Property tax records, construction permits, expansion approvals, Coast Guard correspondence. Nothing surprising at first. Then I found a thick binder labeled Original Waterfront Development. The pages inside were yellowed with age. Some carried signatures dating back more than 30 years. I spent hours reading. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. Every inch of the marina had been documented. Every dock extension, every utility connection, every shoreline improvement. There was no ambiguity, no gray area, no missing ownership chain. Walker Marina controlled the property completely. The Homeowners Association did not possess a single square foot. But the most valuable discovery was not ownership documentation. It was everything connected to operation and liability. My father had anticipated problems long before Harbor Oaks ever existed. There were detailed agreements covering vessel storage, dock access, commercial activity, insurance responsibilities, environmental compliance requirements, harbor operations. Reading through them felt like listening to him explain the business all over again. He had built protections into every layer of the marina. Protections most people would never notice. One folder in particular caught my attention. Inside were copies of waterfront easements, access agreements, and operating restrictions recorded with the county years earlier. Several pages outlined exactly who could authorize marina operations and collect fees associated with the property. The answer was simple. Only Walker Marina. Nobody else. Not a management company. Not a neighborhood association. Not a yacht club. Nobody. I leaned back in my chair and listened to rain tapping against the office windows. Water drummed softly on the dock roofs outside. Somewhere in the harbor a halyard clinked rhythmically against a mast. For the first time since Victoria began her campaign, I felt completely calm. Because the situation was no longer about opinion. It was about documentation. Hard documentation. The kind judges prefer. The kind insurance companies respect. The kind government agencies actually read. Then I found something even better. Tucked inside another binder was a collection of correspondence related to commercial waterfront operations. Detailed guidance covering fee collection, harbor management, and regulatory obligations. As I reviewed the material, one realization kept growing larger. Harbor Oaks had not merely created newsletters and hosted events. They had established systems, collected money, issued memberships, managed access, created records. In other words, they had spent months documenting activities they never had authority to perform. Outside, the rain slowly faded. Evening sunlight broke through the clouds and reflected across the harbor in streaks of gold. Dozens of yachts sat quietly in their slips. Harbor Oaks banners still fluttered above portions of the docks. Victoria probably believed everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Residents continued paying fees. Committees continued operating. The illusion remained intact. I closed the final binder and carefully returned it to the cabinet. Then I locked the drawer, because hidden inside those folders was something far more valuable than a deed. It was the blueprint showing exactly how Harbor Oaks had walked itself into a problem it could no longer see. The following Tuesday, I met Michael Grant for lunch at a small waterfront restaurant overlooking the channel. The place had been there for years. Weathered wooden decks stretched over the water. Ceiling fans spun lazily overhead. The smell of grilled seafood mixed with salt air drifting in from the harbor. Fishing boats passed beyond the windows while gulls circled above the docks. Michael arrived carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than some of the buildings downtown. He was in his early 60s, calm, sharp, and completely unimpressed by theatrics. My father trusted him. That alone was enough for me. I spread copies of the documents across the table. Membership agreements, assessment notices, harbor operations guidelines, fee schedules, event promotions, security directives. Michael flipped through them one at a time without saying much. Occasionally, he would adjust his glasses and make a small note in the margin of a page. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, he closed the last folder and leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, sunlight reflected across the water in bright flashes. A yacht moved slowly through the channel, leaving a gentle wake behind it. I asked him the obvious question. How bad is it? Michael smiled. Not for you. That answer surprised me. Most attorneys begin discussing lawsuits immediately. Michael did not. Instead, he asked how long Harbor Oaks had been operating its marina programs. I told him everything. The banners, the membership fees, the events, the security patrols, the assessments, the newsletters, the collected payments. Every month seemed bigger than the last. His smile grew wider with each detail. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Have they stopped yet? I told him no. In fact, they appeared to be expanding operations. Michael nodded slowly and closed his briefcase. Good. Let them continue. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. Every instinct told me to shut the entire thing down immediately. Remove signs. Send notices. Demand compliance. Michael disagreed completely. He explained it using language my father probably would have appreciated. People make mistakes. Then they document those mistakes. Then they repeat those mistakes until the documentation becomes impossible to explain away. Harbor Oaks was already far beyond a simple misunderstanding. They were creating operational records, financial records, administrative records, public records. The longer they continued, the larger the file became. The larger the file became, the harder it would be for anyone to claim confusion later. I remember watching boats move through the harbor while his words settled in. The channel sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Wind rippled across the water. Somewhere nearby, a dock bell rang softly as a vessel departed. Michael pointed toward the marina visible in the distance. They believe they are building authority, he said. What they are actually building is evidence. That sentence stayed with me. Over the following weeks, I followed his advice exactly. I continued documenting everything. Every new announcement went into the filing cabinet. Every payment notice. Every policy change. Every committee report. Meanwhile, Harbor Oaks expanded further. New memberships appeared. Additional assessments were announced. More yachts arrived. More residents participated. Victoria seemed happier than ever. She walked the docks with complete confidence, greeting boat owners and discussing future plans for the waterfront as though ownership questions had already been settled. Standing on dock C one evening, listening to ropes creak against polished cleats beneath the glow of harbor lights, I watched another Harbor Oaks gathering begin aboard a luxury yacht. Music drifted softly across the water. Laughter followed. Victoria stood near the upper deck, smiling at guests. She looked completely certain she was winning. What she could not see was that every step forward brought her exactly where Michael wanted her to go. The call came at 5:12 on a Thursday morning. I was already awake. Harbor life tends to do that to you. The sky outside my kitchen window was still dark. A faint blue glow sat low on the horizon beyond the water. Coffee steamed from a mug beside me while I reviewed weather reports for the weekend. Then my phone vibrated across the counter. Michael Grant. I answered immediately. His voice sounded calm as always. It is time. That was all he said before giving me a location and hanging up. 40 minutes later, I stood at the edge of the marina with cool salt air brushing across my face. The harbor looked unusually quiet. The water was smooth as glass. Dock lights cast long reflections across the slips. Ropes creaked softly against polished cleats. A few gulls circled overhead waiting for sunrise. At first glance, nothing appeared different. Then I noticed the vehicles. Several county trucks rolled slowly into the Marina parking area. Behind them came marked vehicles from the sheriff's office. A harbor enforcement vessel moved through the channel toward the docks. Another followed behind it. Their navigation lights reflected across the dark water as they approached. Everything happened calmly, professionally, methodically. No sirens, no commotion, just people carrying out their responsibilities. Deputies stepped onto the docks carrying clipboards and folders. Harbor officials accompanied them. A marine operations supervisor walked alongside several investigators reviewing vessel registration documents. I recognized a few faces from previous regulatory inspections over the years. They moved with the confidence of people who already knew exactly what they were looking for. The first yacht owner appeared a few minutes later. Confused, sleepy, still holding a cup of coffee. He watched deputies speaking with harbor officials beside his vessel. Then another owner arrived. Then another. Questions spread quickly across the marina. People gathered along the docks. Voices remained polite but increasingly concerned. The smell of salt water mixed with fresh coffee drifting from nearby cabins aboard several yachts. Harbor lights slowly faded as sunrise brightened the eastern sky. Then Victoria arrived. Even from a distance, I recognized her immediately. She stepped out of a luxury sport utility vehicle and headed toward the waterfront with quick, determined strides. Her expression shifted the moment she saw the number of officials gathered near the slips. I could not hear every conversation from where I stood, but I did not need to. The body language said enough. Questions became explanations. Explanations became documentation. Documentation became decisions. One by one, notices were posted. One by one, vessels were reviewed. One by one, marina operations records were examined. Harbor Oaks had spent months creating paperwork, membership agreements, fee structures, operational guidelines, assessment schedules, administrative policies. Everything Michael told me would matter had mattered. The waterfront empire Victoria built existed almost entirely on paper. Unfortunately for her, the paper existed. By mid-morning, the marina looked completely different. Harbor officials coordinated vessel movements. Several yachts were relocated under official supervision pending resolution of administrative and property access issues. Dock assignments changed. Access permissions changed. Operational authority changed. Residents who once assumed Harbor Oaks controlled the marina suddenly discovered that assumptions and ownership were not the same thing. I watched the entire process from the end of Dock C. The same dock where I had spent months quietly collecting evidence while everyone else celebrated. The same dock where Harbor Oaks banners had once fluttered proudly above events and gatherings. Now those banners hung motionless in the morning breeze. Victoria stood near the harbor office speaking with officials while folders changed hands. Her confidence was gone, not replaced by anger, replaced by something much worse. Realization. Because for the first time she was no longer operating inside a story she created. She was operating inside a file built from her own records. As sunlight spread across the harbor and reflected off rows of expensive yachts, I slipped my hands into my pockets and listened to the gentle sound of water moving beneath the docks. The marina looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. Not because nothing was happening, quite the opposite. The noise simply moved from the docks into conference rooms, legal offices, insurance departments, and administrative hearings. Out on the water, the harbor slowly returned to normal. The first thing I noticed was the absence of banners. One morning I walked down Dock C just after sunrise and realized every Harbor Oaks sign had disappeared. The metal brackets remained, but the banners themselves were gone. Salt air drifted across the slips. Gulls glided above the channel. Water lapped gently against the pilings exactly as it had for decades. For the first time in months, the marina felt like itself again. Residents gradually learned the full story. The newsletters they trusted, the fees they paid, the memberships they purchased. Every document became part of a larger review. Questions spread quickly through Harbor Oaks. Some homeowners wanted answers. Others wanted refunds. A few simply wanted distance from the entire situation. Meetings grew longer. Attendance grew larger. The confidence that once surrounded the Homeowners Association began fading with every new piece of information that surfaced. Victoria largely disappeared from public view. The woman who once hosted waterfront events and posed for photographs aboard luxury yachts no longer walked the docks giving speeches about community vision. Her influence had depended on perception. Once perception changed, everything else followed. Michael remained characteristically calm through the entire process. A few days after the marina returned to normal operations, we met again at the same waterfront restaurant overlooking the channel. The afternoon sun reflected off the water beyond the deck railings. Boats moved lazily through the harbor entrance. The smell of saltwater and grilled seafood filled the air. Michael stirred his coffee and looked toward the marina in the distance. "You know what the funny part is?" he said. I asked him what he meant. He smiled. They never needed an opponent. They created their own problem. The more I thought about it, the more accurate that observation became. The invoice that started everything eventually turned out to be one of the least important pieces of evidence in the entire case. The real issue was everything that came afterward. The newsletters, the fee schedules, the memberships, the operational policies, the collection of money, the endless paperwork. Harbor Oaks spent months documenting activities they never had authority to perform. Every decision added another page. Every page strengthened the file. By the end, nobody needed dramatic arguments because the records told the story themselves. A month later, I stood at the end of the marina just before sunset. The harbor glowed orange beneath the fading light. Charter captains prepared for early departures. Families loaded coolers onto fishing boats. Dock lights flickered on one by one as evening settled across the water. The familiar smell of diesel fuel and salt air mixed with the sound of ropes creaking softly against cleats. I looked across the slips where expensive yachts still sat quietly in the harbor. The difference now was simple. Everyone understood exactly who owned the property beneath them. Ownership had not changed. The documents had not changed. The marina had not changed. Only the illusion had disappeared. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the old invoice that had started the entire chain of events. The paper was slightly worn from months of handling. For a moment, I studied the numbers printed across the page. Then I smiled and folded it again. My father used to say the ocean has a way of exposing weak foundations. Sooner or later, reality always wins. Standing there watching sunlight fade across the harbor he built, I finally understood exactly what he meant. Justice does not arrive with noise. It arrives with patience, paperwork, and the simple truth of who owns the dock beneath your feet.